Allow me to welcome you formally to MacEwan University. We're honored to have you here today for an important and timely digital respect conversation with Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, Governor-General of Canada. We are also grateful to have Her Honour, the Honourable Selma Lakhani, Alberta's Lieutenant Governor, join us. We're also pleased to have additional distinguished guests, one of whom I'd like to acknowledge, Senator Christopher Wells, here in the front row, most recently a Canada Research Chair at MacEwan University. I'd like to begin our time together by acknowledging that the land on which we gather in Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. The First Peoples' connection to the land teaches us about our inherent responsibility to protect and respect Mother Earth. With this acknowledgement, we honor the ancestors and children who have been buried here, missing and murdered Indigenous women and men, and the process of ongoing collective healing for all human beings. We are reminded that we are all treaty people and of the responsibility we have to one another. We are grateful to have George Desjardins, our Indigenous Knowledge Keeper, join us here today. He'll now begin this morning.
Kinanaskum tanaw oisko otistema imigoyan anutse kagis mustamaso yekio mamu tawi maukisi watsin kinanaskum nani wanska kanutska gisako egnik naskamo kakio imigoyan agape kano nani wichi komonan kakio wasaka mipia humanutska gisako miopixko ni migoyan Sagitok minuitsitok. Egunik mina kakio oskayak mina kakio emoitis ko etegotian. Suim nan awinet tego eupix ko ni hiwak. Egwa mina kakio ase ewanitat sagi hananak. Iwichi komona ni ananota. Bisuim nan kakio ota tato kisaga ota wigianaski anots wapagi mina kakege. Exam. Hi. I was just asked to share a brief prayer for you, the opening today, and it's always an honor to share a prayer for everyone because it's an honor to be asked to speak and share, and I'm always proud to use our language first, the language that was given to us. And I just prayed for everyone to have a good day and to our words be guided by our ancestors today, tomorrow, and every day. Thank you. So.
Thank you for starting our time together in a good way. We have an exciting morning planned for you today. First, we will hear Her Excellency's thoughts on digital respect. Then our moderator will introduce a panel of 3 experts to share their experiences and explore solutions. Our panel members will be available subsequently for your questions about digital respect. It is now my privilege to welcome Dr. Annette Trimby, MacEwan University's President and Vice Chancellor, to offer opening remarks for today's symposium.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, George, for your prayer. And thank you, Craig. I am so pleased to welcome Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, and His Excellency Whit Fraser to our campus. He remembered when we were at college. At MacEwan, we are focused on teaching greatness, delivering an exceptional undergraduate experience that prepares our graduates to contribute to society in meaningful ways. This starts with a solid academic base in our classrooms, along with hands-on learning with our community partners, some of whom are here today, and nurturing what I like to call durable skills rather than soft skills. Things like communication, critical thinking, collaboration, resilience, self-awareness, and leadership. There is a strong alignment between today's topic, building a safe and respectful digital world, and our ongoing mission at MacEwan. We seek to prepare our students not only for the real world we are living in now, but also to lead the way forward to create the world we want to live in, one in which our digital spaces are safer for everyone. There is value in difficult conversations. They can be crunchy and uncomfortable, but they help people with different perspectives share their views with each other, better understand one another, and then find common ground from which to build. Without these conversations, there is limited opportunity to work together to find solutions. When online spaces are not safe for respectful discourse, important conversations about important issues just don't take place. People are personally attacked for their views, and the ability to agree to disagree is lost. That is why today's discussion is so very important. We were thrilled when Her Honor, the Honourable Salma Lakhani, the Lieutenant Governor of Alberta, reached out to us about hosting this event. We are so grateful to have Her Honor and His Honor, Dr. Zahir Lakhani, here with us today. Installed as Alberta's 19th Lieutenant Governor on August 26, 2020, Her Honor is the first Muslim Lieutenant Governor, as well as the first African-born and first of South Asian descent. Her long-standing service as a community leader and volunteer has been guided by a deep commitment to the values of pluralism and inclusion, and from her dedication to championing those who face barriers in life. I thank Her Honor for her support in bringing us together today. It is a tremendous privilege to host you here on campus. Her Excellency was sworn in on July 26, 2021 as Canada's first Indigenous Governor-General. She is the 30th Governor-General since Confederation. Her Excellency gained national and international recognition for her work on Arctic and Indigenous issues and for her efforts in advocating for Inuit rights, youth, and culture. As Governor-General, one of her priorities is to highlight the issue of online abuse and harassment, raise awareness of its impacts, and empower people to deal with online abuse. In February 2023, the Office of the Secretary to the Governor-General turned off all comments on the Governor-General's social media platforms due to an increase in abusive comments, including a number of violent threats. That experience led Her Excellency to initiate discussions about digital respect, including the symposium here today. Recently, Her Excellency said, "You have to use adversity as a way to grow." That's what I did. That's what she said. I looked at every adverse situation that I went through to see how to continue building my own character. A powerful lesson for us all, don't you think? And MacEwan is honored to continue these discussions and to identify ways we can help people deal with online abuse and build a safe and respectful digital world. Thank you to Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, to our expert panelists, and to all of you who have joined us today. I look forward to what will be an engaging and meaningful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trimby. When you spend as much time with a president as a provost is wont to do, you'll pick up on words and phrases that a president likes. So we've heard some this morning, and I would encourage everyone to try to work crunchy conversation into your discourse this week. I'd now like to introduce today's moderator, Sheena Rossiter, an assistant professor and head of media production with MacEwan University. Prior to joining our Faculty of Fine Arts and Communications, Professor Rossiter was a journalist with the CBC and the senior digital producer at The Walrus. As an award-winning journalist, she worked as a foreign correspondent in Brazil and has produced various documentaries and podcasts. As Professor Rossiter comes to the stage, Please join me in welcoming as well to MacEwan University Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon.
Thank you, Dr. Monk. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us here today at MacEwan University.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, it's an absolute honor to be hosting you to have a symposium here in Edmonton to speak about this topic that is very near and dear to you, about digital online respect. Why have you chosen to host a national tour where you're going to speak about this?
Well, it happened a while ago when I first got installed as Governor General. There was a lot of abusive language being used online on the platform that we have for the Governor General on different sites. And it just got worse and worse, and some of it started to be directly related to me as a woman and as an Indigenous woman. And there was a lot of stuff going on. So we had we decided as a group and in the office to do something. And the only way to make a statement to me was to go public about it. I didn't just didn't want to walk away from it, which a lot of people have to do to safeguard their own mental well-being. But I felt it was necessary for Canada to be talking about such an important issue, that there were so many Canadians that were being attacked on a daily basis, but there was no real public conversation about it. So that's when we started to, have this. The first discussion we had was on International Women's Day, and that was the first time, I talked about the experience that I had gone through, and then last year we had the Symposium, the big one in Ottawa. And everywhere I go in Canada now, I have these types of events, which I think are really important because I like to hear what people have to say about it. I think it's really important that you either have your own experience to talk about, or you may have thought about what are some of the solutions that we together can talk about. So it's both. People who want to talk about their personal experience and what happened, it's open, it's fine. But also we want people to just express their own views in terms of, well, maybe if we start to have allyship with other organizations, and we'll talk about that later, then that connection starts to build, So these are just some things I think we'll go through today.
Absolutely, and I mean, having these conversations in a more public platform as we are having, how important is it to just create this dialogue and to gather people to speak about this stuff, and why is it such an important issue to speak about digital respect on a public platform like this?
Well, I think, first of all, people are being impacted in different ways. Young girls and young boys are being impacted in different ways. In particular, I find that, generally women are, and a lot of racially, women, what am I trying to say? That have different cultures and backgrounds are often more attacked. Marginalized people.
Absolutely.
But also one of the, I think, issues that is facing us now is how women are starting to pull away from public office. being public servants or leaders in Canada. And you see that happening across the country. And that to me is of concern, because in our country, we need the role of men and women equally, as strong as they can be together. And I think if women are going to back out of these important roles, either in business or politics or any other field, then I think we have a problem. So let's try and deal with it. And that's my approach. How do we deal with that? But that's not the only issue. People are being attacked and demeaned every day on a personal level, so it goes everywhere.
Well, and some of the statistics you have on your website where you're talking about this issue are quite staggering. Just to read one here, according to the UN, 38% of women have personal experiences with online violence, and most girls report their first experience on social media harassment, and takes place between the ages of 14 to 16. So these situations are happening almost younger and younger for women and girls. And this ultimately, the experiences that you experienced, it led you to turn off the comments on all your social media platforms. Although your team still posts, people aren't allowed to comment on them. I'm sure that wasn't taken lightly when you made that decision. Can you just take us of what led to that choice?
It started to affect different people my team was being affected, because they had to read all this terrible vitriol and deal with it themselves. And then the family I got affected by it. Everybody has, we all have our emotions. We're human beings. Doesn't matter what position we hold in our careers or life. We do get impacted by stuff like that. But then again, when my children and my grandchildren started to wonder what was going on, then it just got the family much more into the whole process. And at work, we didn't need that kind of, we always welcome constructive criticism. Like, I'm always open to constructive criticism. But when it starts to hit below the belt, so to say, then you have to say, enough. So we use the comments as a way of telling people that were making those comments that we weren't going to listen to them, but that we still welcome the feedback of Canadians. And the platforms are still open, and we put all our work onto our platforms now, but there are other ways of communicating with us. So email, telephone, messaging, there's all these different ways of communicating. So we didn't cut off Canadians, so to speak. It's still open to Canadians, but not through the social media sites at the moment. Hopefully that will change. But it's really important for me to be talking to, like as an example here in Alberta, with a whole cross-section of people that care about this issue, and also young people. I see a lot of young people today in the audience, and it's really important to have, just to learn about what it is. I think that's one of the things that we talk about is how do we build this allyship? What do we do? Well, we need to work together with universities, because there's a lot of young students, young women and young men. And we also have to work with other agencies to make sure that we're addressing this issue together. So partnership, working together, is part of that answer, and to also build what we call toolkits. Like if you are being attacked by social media sites or individuals on social media, it's important to reach out to somebody somebody you trust, somebody that's close to you, it could be a friend, it could be a family member. But if you have to reach out in order to deal with the trauma that you're experiencing because of that. The other thing I find too is that we as humans, as adults, don't know a lot about what social media is. Like most young people, we just, even as an adult, when social media came around, oh, I'm going to join Facebook. Well, what is Facebook? So as parents and grandparents, I think we also have to teach our children what this platform is all about. Because it has its good points. It's not all bad. That's how I communicate with my family up in the Arctic. And it's very helpful in many ways. So it's important to talk about the good and the bad of these sites and how to, look for signs that this is not the right thing to do, even as a young adult.
Absolutely, and social media has only been around really for about 2 decades, and we don't really know what the long-term impacts of social media will be. So you mentioned the importance of allyship and partnering with universities. How critical is it to have this sort of allyship when it comes to digital respect and online abuse to continue this conversation?
It's very important. The conversations are important. It doesn't matter what conversation you have, it's important to communicate. I've been told by my children that. Two of my sons are pilots, and the older one always says, cockpit management is necessary. So, we need our allies to speak up and speak out. I think that's one of the things that we need to do, like we are doing right now in this gathering, in this symposium. But we also need to listen. I need allies to listen to victims, who raise their concerns about impact and what they're encountering. I spoke about that a little bit earlier. It's been a little over a year ago since I spoke about this issue. And men and women and gender diverse individuals, really people of all ages, many of whom are not in the public eye or are not in public roles, have raised their concerns to me personally as well. So like I said, they share their fear. They feel isolated, and feel isolated in the face of this online abuse. And I think just that allyship with in different ways, with families working together with their children on understanding what this new platform, it's getting bigger and bigger every day. And it probably should be taught in school as well, but a lot of it needs to be done with the children at home as well.
I mean, that's a very valid point that you bring up, that there's education that needs to happen at home as well as in public platforms like we have here. So based on the insights that you've gained through speaking with people both publicly and privately, where do we go from here? What's the next step?
I think the first thing is to create the networks of resilience, which we are doing across the country as we move from different parts of Canada, different regions of Canada. We're talking about the need to create networks of resilience, and this takes 2 forms. The first is a support system for those who are struggling. The second is collaboration. We must work together to minimize the impacts of online attacks and to acknowledge each other's experiences and to identify or develop solutions. And solutions can be different in different parts of the country. It depends on how each of the groups want to build that allyship and who wants to be involved, in it. So these are some of the things that we've been talking about. So hopefully we'll get more ideas today as we move on during the day.
And And Your Excellency, what gives you hope for the future when we're having conversations like this?
Well, you know, Canada is a hopeful place for me because Canadians are very resilient. I've gone across the country to different parts of the north, the east, the west, the south, southern part of Canada, and I meet people that care about how well we are doing or how well we should be doing. And I see a lot of resilience. I just came from Jasper the day before yesterday, and you know, the devastation there is enormous, and many people have lost their homes and everything that they ever owned in their lives. I was at the elders' home, and these individuals are like 80, in their 80s, and they've lived there most of their life, and they've lost everything, but they're still like, they came together as a community, and that was so meaningful. You could feel the spirit of people wanting to make things better for themselves. So they've all, you know, they're talking about the next stage. What are we going to do next? And they have enormous challenges ahead of them, but they have this attitude that we will get there. Mm-hmm. We will make it better again. And that inspires me as the Governor General, because I see hope in many people. I see hope now and in the future, because hope can be now, and hope can be more futuristic. So I think Canadians generally feel that, yes, we have a lot of challenges at the moment. I think the world has a lot of tremendous challenges at the moment, and each country has its own. But I think it's about who we are. What are we like? You know, are we empathetic? Are we, you know, welcoming people? We have been known as welcoming Canadians. Canada has always been seen as a welcoming country. So I think that inspiration comes from you. I've always been a very active, proactive person, but I get it from people. It's part of it. It feeds me.
Well, I hope that we can help spark some of that inspiration today through some dialogues that we continue to have here. Your Excellency, thank you so much for all your insights today and for taking the time to chat with us about this issue that is one of your commitments and near and dear to your heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, I have one thing. This is my last comment. And be kind to one another. We must be kind to each other.
If there's one thing in this life, it's be kind.
Yes, be kind.
And before I'd like to invite our panel onto the stage, I'd like to invite Dr. President Trimby to come up to present Her Excellency with a pendulum blanket that we have here, a gift on behalf of all of us here at MacEwan University.
And the gift, the blanket, was designed in 2019 for MacEwan.
Yes, and some points here. Giving this blanket is more than a way of just saying thank you. It's an act of honoring and showing respect to people who have contributed to common good, and a way to recognize those who made significant contributions to Indigenous initiatives.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a way to put a blanket on. I can't say I know what it is exactly, but you can watch me try. It's like convocation with hoods. We're about the same height, so that's helpful. Beautiful.
Thank you
very much.
Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for joining us today. Please join me in thanking Her Excellency for joining us today. Now I'd like to welcome our three panelists to come and join me on the stage. So here on the end here we have Katrina Ingram. She is the founder and CEO of Ethically Aligned AI, a company that helps organizations drive better outcomes in design, development, and deployment of AI systems. She was named to the 100 Brilliant Women in AI Ethics list and hosts the AI for Society Dialogues podcast, and she currently teaches at the University of Alberta and MacEwan University. Welcome, Ms. Ingram. Next, immediately here to my left, we have Dr. Jared Wesley, who is a professor of political science at the University of Alberta. He's currently serving as an associate dean in the Faculty of Arts and is a member of the Black Faculty Collective. Dr. Wesley leads the Common Ground Initiative, which examines the gap between who Western Canadians are and who they see themselves to be. Welcome, Dr. Wesley. And finally, here in the center, I'd like to introduce Terry Cardinal. Ms. Cardinal is from Saddle Lake Cree Nation and is MacEwan University's first Associate Vice President, Indigenous Initiatives. Ms. Cardinal has been instrumental in the growth of developing Hiawatsison's Indigenous Center and brings deep Indigenous knowledge, strong connections to Indigenous communities, and a clear understanding of Indigenous students' needs to her work. She's an instructor in the Faculty of Health and Community Studies, and her research focuses on Nihewa traditional end-of-life practices and structure. Ms. Cardinal is the co-host and the award-winning podcast, Two Crees in a Pod. Welcome, Ms. Cardinal. To start things out here, over the past few years, important social issues have been becoming increasingly divisive. And this divisiveness is reflected in debates we see on many online platforms. It's quite frankly unavoidable. Dr. Wesley is someone who's a recognized innovator in addressing political polarization. Can you help us understand what's fueling this division and the impact that it's having on people?
Yes, and you've given me 3 minutes to explain a very deep conversation. No, that's good. Thank you, Your Excellency, Your Honor, for the invitation. And Annette, thank you so much for inviting us across the river. We should do this more often. You know, I'll go back to what Her Excellency just mentioned, and it was, you know, just a small snippet of some very excellent insights. And you said, we have to ask ourselves, who are we? Do we want to be empathetic? Right? And I think I lose my political scientist license if I don't mention that a lot of these questions have been asked and answered in different ways for thousands of years, right? And it boils down to me, to this key question: are we better off together, or are we built to be separate? I land on the side that we are better off together, and a lot of anthropologists would agree with me. We can go all the way back to the Serengeti and find groups of people coming together to solve common problems. But that, you know, that approach doesn't seem to fit well with modern society. Right? An economist will tell you the structure of the economy is such that we're being atomized, we're being broken up into individual working units, right? You'll talk with folks that study social media, which we'll talk about today, that'll say that our platforms are built to separate us by putting us on our phones independent of one another. It separates us from the communities that are around us. And to me, that is pulling us away from our natural nature to come together. And in the absence of broader communities where we can come together, we fall victim to an us versus them mentality that's promoted by a lot of our political leaders, unfortunately, today. And so, to me, the root of this polarization is really part of human nature, to come together. The question is, how do we build institutions, how do we build conversations like this one that encourage us to go beyond just our small, tight-knit group of people that agree with us on every issue, right? And fortunately, we do have a liberal democratic system that's built that way, right? We have concepts like federalism that bring together different regional communities from across Canada. And while those types of institutions are being threatened right now, they are being very resilient. That's the word of the day. Thank you, Your Excellency. They are being very resilient. And I think that we need to lean on them even more to promote the type of pluralism that Annette mentioned in her opening arguments as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wesley. And now moving over to Ms. Ingram on the end. Digital technologies, AI is just infiltrating more. It's not just a question of being on social media, but AI and artificial intelligence is increasingly shaping our online interactions. As an expert in the ethics of AI, how are these tools influencing our ability to foster safe and respectful digital environments?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and I want to give you a couple of metaphors to think about as I answer that question. And the first is this idea of playing nice in the sandbox, or the digital sandbox. And so what I'm going to talk about is the ways in which the sandbox works against us when we're trying to do that. So that's kind of one metaphor. And we see that when it comes to things like road rage. So we've all probably either experienced road rage or seen road rage in action. And it happens when we get behind the wheel of a ton of steel and we're in control, and all of a sudden we're doing rude and aggressive things that we normally wouldn't do. And there's a role that the technology plays in that. And so just to kind of pick up on that and kind of bring it into center of the conversation on digital platforms, first thing we need to know about these platforms, when we think about what is Facebook, for example, as the Governor General has asked about, it's not necessarily a public space. It's a private space masquerading as a public space. And so if we think about what are these things, well, fundamentally they're businesses, they're companies, they're there to make a profit. And the way that they make a profit is by gathering up all of our data, using AI and machine learning to analyze it and know some things about us, and then selling that off to advertisers. This is a big business model. It's a multi-billion, trillion-dollar business model. So that's kind of one thing to know about these spaces. The second thing, it turns out that raging is engaging. And these platforms are optimized for engagement because when you're engaged, you stay on the platform longer. They can collect more data. They can know more things. And so these platforms are all optimized for this idea of engagement and data collection. And when you're emotionally charged, you tend to stay on that platform longer. And what that does, and this is, I want to quote the scholar Wendy Chun, who's done some fantastic work in this area. She calls this creating agitating clusters of comforting rage. And we can think about that as getting in an echo chamber, being in our bubble. You can think about it as the mob mentality, where we kind of form these groups and everybody's echoing what we're saying. We feel really entitled to say these things. And so that's a little bit about what's going on with these systems. The last point I want to make is everything I've said, it's not to absolve this behavior at all. I think some of the things that are going on are really abhorrent, but it's just to help you really understand a little bit about what these platforms are doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned that these are effectively businesses collecting data. I remember in an interview I did with somebody who was a clothing company, and she said, I don't own a clothing company, I own a data collection company. Mm-hmm. Because effectively just collecting data all the time, every click there's data attached to that and metadata. And moving forward with things with this digital landscape, it impacts all of us in many different ways. And this shaping technology, it creates this sort of divisiveness that we've already spoken a little bit about, and it affects us all. And Ms. Cardinal, given that your work is centered around Indigenous communities, can you help us understand a little bit about the unique challenges that you see pertaining to Indigenous representation and the importance of connection and belonging while respecting Indigenous values, laws, and ethics?
Thank you. Yeah, so raging is engaging. That's a new quote that's going to stick with me. So good morning, everyone. Just want to give thanks to George as well for opening us up with a blessing. That's always really important when we're having sometimes difficult conversations. And so, as mentioned, I've been working here at the university for almost 8 years. And I, previous to that, always worked within Indigenous communities, and so First Nations communities. And then coming into Edmonton, working in a Western institution, there was a lot of changes that happened for me. I remember within, and I'm going to speak and pull just from what you shared with us today, Your Excellency, is pull from my own experience in the work that I do today, is that, that first year was really difficult for me. And not a lot of people knew about that except my immediate family. And so it was difficult in that I was engaging publicly a lot more in my work. I was doing a lot of work and research in Indian residential schools at that time because my family is directly impacted. And anytime that there was a news article or something that came out in the public, I would automatically get emails. I would get hate mail. I would get letters. There was letters being mailed to my work. Any type of form of trying to connect with me. And so initially, I wanted to rage. And I had to really think about how I live by my own ethics and my own values as an Ehio person, and what my parents have taught me, about integrity. How do I walk in this world with integrity, with ethics, and with respect, even though I'm being disrespected? And so I had to manage that with my family and respond effectively. And by that, was continually going to the elders in my community and people within my community and sharing some of the experiences that I was having, and really looking at how they supported me. And they would say "Akame mok," which is, don't give up, keep going. And part of that was, as we moved through the next few years was, when that would happen and I was being attacked in different forms, I would ignore it. I stopped going to the comment section. I stopped going online. I'm on Facebook. What I started doing was also creating a podcast. And that podcast was about creating and bringing forward Indigenous voices and really talking about how beautiful we are and our resiliency. So really trying to contrast, the negativity with sharing our beautifulness with others and our own excellency and our Indigenous excellence that we have across this country.
Yeah, as Her Excellency was saying, a lot of voices get taken out of the conversation when we feel these sort of threats because we almost self-censor a little bit. And we're glad that you overcame the adversity and chose to overcome it regardless. So staying with you, Ms. Cardinal, considering the uniqueness of this issue for Indigenous people, what kind of solutions would you call for, and how can we ensure that these solutions can authentically support and uplift Indigenous voices and perspectives?
Well, I think about what my father has shared with me. He has talked to me about how important it is. When I've asked my dad, what would you like me to do, as your daughter? And he talked about, my girl, it's important that you educate people about us. And so that's been me and my siblings' work, is how we are educating people. I think that if we can help people to understand about us, our history, we can make change. I think that the other thing is, how are we not focusing on specifically the negativity that comes with the attacks? If I think about if I backed up 7 years and I went and I really struggled with, addressing more so the concerns and then focusing on the negative feedback, that I wouldn't be where I am today. And I really focused on my family, I focused on my community, and really bringing forward the knowledge that we have embedded within our communities, but also recognizing that I had to learn around trauma management. And my background is in social work. I studied trauma specifically within our Indigenous communities, and I had to learn on how to manage that effectively, and how to respond effectively, and recognize what came up for me when I was experiencing racism or attacks in the work that I do. The other thing that I'll add is that I remember in gosh, that was in 2020, and Dr. Christopher Wells, we submitted an open letter to the City of Edmonton in relation to wards, renaming the wards in the City of Edmonton to Indigenous names. And it was at that time that I went into ceremony and I asked, you know, again, going to the elders and asking, what do I do with this? You know, it's been accepted by the city, how do we move forward? And it was at that time that I got a teaching about Indigenous governance, but specifically women in leadership. And it was by Dr. Leona Makokis. And she shared with me the importance of, traditionally as Indigenous people, Indigenous women were the decision makers within the community. And we made the decisions because we were in the center, we were connected to the children, we were connected to the elders, we were essentially the leaders, and we have lost that in some way. And so bring together, she said, bring together all women when you do this project, all Indigenous women. And so I did that. We did that with many different supports in the community, and really, you know, that was an amazing learning experience for me, because I was able to see, you know, we didn't always agree. We didn't always agree like on a name, but we came to a consensus and we were respectful for one another. We respected, you know, the decisions that were being made. And so I think about, as we move forward, the importance of reviving, again, our traditional governance systems within our communities specifically, and how we're uplifting Indigenous women. You know, because my babies watch me. I have 2 daughters at home. They are not allowed on social media. One's in high school, and thankfully she hasn't fought me on it yet. But, you know, I think about the importance of what my children are seeing their mom do. And I hope that one day, you know, that we have other Indigenous folks, Indigenous women, coming and putting their voice forward as well.
Thank you very much for highlighting those voices. And when we talk about AI, it's often in the context of problems. We just feel that AI is coming and going to attack us all, and it's really the problem. But Ms. Ingram, how can we reframe it? How can we leverage AI to be a solution and help us with digital respect in this space?
Yeah, I'll talk about this from a couple of different angles. So the first thing is, we already are. So all of these big platforms, they all leverage artificial intelligence to help find those patterns of hate, let's say, in the data, help the content moderators. The problem is, it's a massive problem. And so these systems aren't perfect, and they kind of do the best they can, but clearly they're missing things. But also, they're also catching things, and this is sometimes called a false positive in the world of AI. They're catching things that aren't really necessarily hateful. Maybe it's someone speaking up about an issue that really should be spoken up about, and so they kind of miss. And so they're not perfect. I think that's the thing we need to understand, is that these are tools. The other thing I think a lot about is going back to that idea of the business model. What are the incentives here? And how might we create a very different set of incentives, and what does that look like? So my the industry I was involved in formerly is public broadcasting. So I think about this in terms of the public broadcasting model. So we have our commercial media, and then we have our public broadcasters. And they have a very different set of incentives. And so the question I've been asking myself lately is, what is the public broadcasting version of these social media platforms, and how could we maybe figure that out as a country, let's say? And then the last thing that's happening is that generative AI, which is the kind of AI that can actually create content. So you've probably all heard of ChatGPT and some of these generative AI tools where we can create new images and text and so forth. In an odd way, I think they might solve some of the problems, but maybe not in the way that we want them to. I think that we're at a moment where we might see traditional mass social media blow up as a result of some of what's going on with generative AI, because they're going to essentially pollute these spaces in ways that make them where we don't want to hang out in those spaces anymore. And so that solves the problem in a slightly different way. And increasingly what I'm seeing is younger people, and I know we have some young people in the audience today, and I'd love to hear from you during Q&A, but what I've been seeing is that you're going into these more closed groups, whether that's a group chat or some kind of more of a closed space, and not spending time on the old school platforms. And so all of those things, I think, speak to the ways in which technology might be reshaping this particular issue.
Well, and going back to political polarization here and about how these platforms are sort of shaping our perspectives, we've seen that heat up a little bit, certainly as the election south of the border is gaining steam just a week away, really. Yeah. And also as we have elections here with Saskatchewan, the provincial election taking place. So Dr. Wesley, today we've talked about the impacts of political polarization online, and what have you and your team been doing to address this issue and what needs to be done?
Yeah, we've taken a pretty low-tech approach to it, actually, and it's built on kind of this counterfactual. So if we were to turn off all the social media platforms tomorrow or ban them from Canada or ban them from Alberta, would we still have the type of polarization that we do today? And I'd suggest we probably would. Another counterfactual is we often blame social media and we often blame political parties. Well, what if political parties aren't involved? And they aren't involved in all levels of democracy. And that's where our team spent most of our time this past summer, was going around and working with different town and city councils and their staff across all of Alberta to talk about the type of factionalism, vitriol, incivility, whatever you want to use the term, that they've been facing, not just online, but increasingly face-to-face. And we found through those conversations is what we've heard already. Annette, in her opening remarks, mentioned that we're seeing people self-select out. They don't want to be part of politics, right? And I think we've moved to the point now where we look at folks that say, I don't want to be involved in this, and look at that as being a common sense reaction, right? It's not, you're not odd by saying you don't want to engage. It's just common sense that you shouldn't if you feel like you are personally in danger. But a lot of the women that we've interviewed say increasingly it's our families that are being the targets of these kinds of attacks. So our team spent a lot of time with town councils across the province. Again, all of these councils, at least for now, are nonpartisan, so we don't have the partisan dynamic at play, but it's still there. We spent time talking with them about developing what we're calling a lexicon or a toolkit for people to understand as individuals what is civil discourse and what's not. And our team's not in the game of calling balls and strikes here or saying this is clearly beyond the line and this one's not, but rather just giving people some common language to use to label some of the behaviors that they're seeing, right? So we, in our toolkit, which will launch on November the 6th, you can go to commongroundpolitics.ca or you can Google Common Ground Politics in Alberta. You'll find that we've got some definitions of terms, like gaslighting. It gets thrown around a lot, but what actually is it? And what implications does it have on the future of our democracy, right? Things like whataboutism, things like ad hominem attacks. We're giving people a common lexicon, right, to discuss these issues and to help not just diagnose when somebody else is engaging in these not so helpful or productive behaviors. That's where we started as a team. We thought, how can we solve everybody else's problem, right, with this? How can we fix other people? As we started to dig underneath this stuff, we found that a lot of us were guilty of some of these offenses as well, right? So for those of you that want to track this in my Twitter timeline, I started to engage a lot less in Twitter as we started to get deeper and deeper into these conversations. Because all of us, I think, can contribute to a better, more civil discourse. But our team, commongroundpolitics.ca, will have this toolkit available on November the 6th.
Any particular reason for the launch date?
Well, it's the day after the U.S. presidential election. Maybe they'll be done. Maybe they'll be done counting votes by then. But no, it couldn't come soon enough. And in the future, we're going to be bringing together groups, civil society, university groups across North America and Europe who are working on this together, right? Bring them together and to share best practices.
Thank you. And we have a really diverse audience here today. We have professors, high school students, university students, and of course all our distinguished guests as well. And I was just wondering, what are the next steps that we can take in terms of having a digital, respectful world that we have here? And I'll start with you on the end, Ms. Ingram. What's a sort of call to action that you would say that we should have?
Well, if you're interested in some of the issues I've been talking about, I have a book recommendation for you, and it's called Chaos Machines by Max Fisher. If you want a little more of an academic take on it, I already mentioned Wendy Chun. She's doing some excellent research in this area. She also has a book called Discriminating Data. So those are kind of my additional resource recommendations. But I also want to echo what Dr. Wesley was saying about this idea of how do we actually engage in more civil discourse. And part of that, I think, part of how we behave online is really reflective of how we live in the world, how we want to show up. And so I encourage everyone to just get offline a little bit more, really think about how you want to engage, almost treat these things maybe as like toxic substances. You know, it's okay to have one glass of wine, but maybe don't have 20 glasses of wine. Really kind of think through that. So those are my recommendations.
Yeah, there has been a recent shift that a lot more people are going to quote-unquote dumb phones, the old school Nokia brick, as I like to refer to it, where people are tending to get a bit more off of smartphones and just going back to the simple calling and texting functions of what a phone actually serves. And Ms. Cardinal, for you, what are some calls to action that you would have in particular for building a safe and respectful digital online space?
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the things that I've recognized is that in terms of, again, and I've spoke a bit about this, is the reactivity that may happen. As you know, we can only work really on ourselves, you know, and think about how we control our actions in our spaces. And while it's important to educate people, I think that one of the things that I have learned in this space is sometimes to step back and not respond. I always give myself a few days. And I have chosen over the years as well to kind of step back more so from social media, being mindful that oftentimes people take a lot of things into context. You know, you read one status or one tweet or one thing and then you think that's truth. And that's problematic, is that sometimes there is a lot of things that are reshared that are not truth. And so then what happens is that you get this ball, right, of just feeding off negativity. And I think that, you know, part of our work is engaging in ways to talk about this and have conversation and create, you know, and speaking to our allies and how we're engaging in those conversations. And really, again, it goes back to, and I love that you said, you know, to be kind to one another. You know, our Gaidaic, which is our old ones, or translated to our elders, you know, the root word of Gaidaic is kindness. That's where that, and so our elders embody kindness. And their role is to, you know, we share as Indigenous people, we're meant to share our teachings and our kindness to everybody. And so if we can live that way, we can spread love that way. And, you know, our first law is love as well. How do we share love with one another? You know, not intimate love, but love in relationships and showing kindness to one another is something that we have, you know, as within our family and our community have really tried to bring to the forefront in managing difficult times.
Definitely an important point about stepping back, and because we can control our own behavior and get out of that rage that Ms. Ingram was speaking about a little bit as well. And Dr. Wesley, for you, what are some final call to actions or thoughts that you'd have here for our audience today?
Yeah. And you don't have to necessarily throw your hand up, but I suspect it's a majority of folks, at least according to our surveys at least. How many people have cut out somebody from their life since the pandemic because you disagreed fundamentally with their choices or their attitudes in and around public health? Few? Yeah. Me too, right? And that's part of the factionalistic behavior that our team is examining. But what I would challenge, I'm sorry, I didn't realize we were supposed to bring a book list. I've got a book list too here, I'll hand out. One of them that I think you should read is How Minds Change. It's written by David McGraney. He's a journalist that's talked to a lot of professors who study in this area, and it's a great book. And the takeaway from How Minds Change is, if your goal is to change people's minds, then your first step should be to develop mutual understanding. Because you can't change somebody else's mind unless you understand where they're coming from, but just as importantly, that they understand where you're coming from. And having conversations with folks that are frank, that talk about why you would like to maintain or rebuild relationships is an important first step. Now, another gentleman in the United States, Anand Giridharadas, has written a book called The Persuaders, and when he and I and people like David McGraney go around and talk like this, the usual reaction is, well, why would I want to build bridges with somebody who's that horrific, right? Or they are a basket of deplorables, which is from south of the border. And Anand Giridharadas in one public event said, somebody asked him, what am I supposed to go up and hug a Nazi, right? And Anand's response, I thought, was quite telling. He said, well, don't start with the Nazis, right? But start with recognizing that everybody that doesn't agree with you on every single point is a Nazi, right? There are some genuine Nazis out there. I'm not downplaying that. But I think to an extent we need to give space for people who have the privilege, the power, the insights to start building those bridges. We need to give them the space to do that. We need to give them support to do that, because the most troubling part for me is when I see online somebody tries to step in and tries to build a bridge, and then people from both sides step in and say, you can't do that. Why are you talking to that person? I think we need to be better at allowing space for people to have the privilege and the power to do that.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to open up questions to the audience. So if anyone has any sort of questions, we have a few people, as you can see, we have the microphone here, a few microphone runners, and also on this side as well. So I kindly ask you to please raise your hand if you'd like to ask anything to our esteemed panel. Oh, we have a hand just here in the front. And, oh, back over there. So I guess we'll just start in the back.
Hi, my name is Willow, and I'm a high school student. I'm here with McNally High School, and I'm in grade 12. And I want to acknowledge the fact that I'm a person, right? And a lot of the times in social media platforms, that is very much forgotten, that I'm a person, I have feelings, and my views matter. And I see a lot of vitriol and hate and just hurting of others that sometimes I don't really understand, but typically I attribute it to the idea of anonymity. When we're in social media, we're behind a screen. We're not staring that person face to face. Because I don't hear people saying, you're fat, face to face. I hear them commenting underneath social media posts. And I think a big thing with kids these days is that's what we're growing into. That's what we see as we're growing as a child. I know people who have phones that are 8 years old, and they're on social media platforms. And how is this raising the population to be heartwarming when we're seeing others drag others down? And I know Her Honor, Her Excellency mentioned this idea of support networks. I have personally experienced mental health challenges, and I have been hospitalized. And in those hospitalizations, there's not a lot of mental supports addressing these issues. There is underfunding, and there is very big systematic problems. And I guess what I'm wondering is, how can we change this? Because the panel's lovely ideas are great, but we're kids. We're not thinking about these things. We're thinking about the fact that, oh, this person said that, so I should hate on that person too. So how can we get to the root of this issue and start with education, actual supports for people? Because a lot of people I know are struggling with mental health, and they say, I don't know where to go. It's underfunded, there's too many people, and people feel really alone. And I think in a social media platform, we want to bring people together, we want it to be a positive outlet, but it's turning really negative. And I wonder, what I want to ask you guys is, how can we move forward, especially with the kids of our generation? How can we take the issue to the root cause and address these issues, because they are affecting people now? You know, we have to deal with them now. Thank you.
Dr. Wesley, would you like to?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. Willow, thank you for using your voice today. Thank you. McNally's near and dear to my heart too. It's just up the hill from me. I live in Riverdale. So thank you for sharing your voice. You raised all big challenges that I hope I see a lot of decision makers in this room here today that need to pay attention to it. Mental health supports are very important. Changing curriculum to make sure that we're updating it so that students are taught how to use and how not to use social media. I think that there's a lot of people that are in search of quick fixes, Like, let's just remove the phones from the classroom. All done, right? People that know that most of that kind of abuse and bullying happens after hours, and taking it out of the classroom isn't going to solve all of those problems. But I'd like to go back to what Her Excellency said. This importance of building networks of resilience. Because the research in the United States shows when youth band together in peer groups that are inclusive, right? It can help to push back against the vitriol. It can also build a culture of inclusion within your schools. And I'm looking right at Senator Wells here, who knows this particularly well when it comes to GSAs in schools. So look, I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old at home. I'm constantly finding myself telling them, no disrespect to their teachers, that adults aren't going to help you fix a lot of these problems. Unfortunately, it's youth that's going to have to do it, and I'm glad you're here, Willow, listening to this. I'm glad that your classmates are here. I'd be happy to talk to you after about how some of the research can help you and your classmates to build that culture of inclusion, but you're right to be here and you're right to raise your voice. Thank you.
Ms. Cardinal-Messenger, any points to add?
Yeah, I'll add. I forgot to add. I'm part of a Beaver group, and we're called the Beavers, and it is a group of women who've come together, and we meet every month, and it is one of the safest spaces that I have, that I could go into and say whatever the heck I want, and we support each other. And we lift each other up, and I think that group has, in many instances, really help my well-being and my mental health and the work that I do. These are Indigenous women who are scholars, who are educators, who are doctors, who are all in different sectors of organizations. And so I think that, and again, I applaud you for, speaking so well and speaking, in terms of the difficulty that our youth have. And I think about my own daughter who's in high school. She was actually supposed to go to McNally. She was over at Vimy. And I think about how she is one of my biggest teachers. And she's my oldest, and she often teaches me about things that are wrong. If we're in conversation, for instance, in a car, and she overhears a conversation on the phone that, maybe in relation to unethical decision that was made, with research, for instance. Once the phone call's done, she'll ask me, "What are you going to do about it?" And I was like, "What do you mean, what am I going to do about it?" And she's like, "Well, you got to do something about it. Like, you got to say something. It's not right. It's not right." And so, my kids are my biggest teachers and teach me to speak up and advocate as well. And so thank you for speaking up today.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add, first of all, my heart hurts when I hear you talk about that. And what I'm thinking about is the ways in which our culture just believes that technology is always a net good. It's always progress. We hear this all the time. The technology is innovation, it's all good. But if we could go back to the beginning of all this and get a do-over, what would we do differently? In what ways have we let down a couple of generations of kids by not being more critical about these technologies? And as new technologies come up, things like generative AI, for example, how might we do better and different? So that's really what I'm kind of sitting with as I hear that comment. I don't have the answers for you, unfortunately, but those are some of the things I think we need to really consider in our culture today.
We have another question over here.
Thank you to all of our panelists for speaking today, and also to Her Excellency for taking the time to provide her insights. My name is Aiden. I'm a fifth-year political science student who's been focusing on global governance, and I myself, I'm legally blind. I'm only 22, but that has led it to that my entire life, although it hasn't been regular, there has never been a time that I've experienced where I can't be harassed on the basis of disability, and it has happened. And what has been disheartening in a bit of a profound way has been, researching global governance and really going down the deep dive into the resources available from the United Nations and other high-level organizations, is that not just the research is out there, but toolkits are out there, advice for policymakers, high-level, 60-page documents from the World Health Organization or UNDSA or anything, really do already paint a very, detailed roadmap of how we can do things like addressing discrimination and digital ethics. So with that kind of, that research existing, those roadmaps existing, and not just at that level, at all levels, I was wondering if any of our panelists could speak to what the disconnect might be to all those roadmaps that exist in the actual implementation of them, and then how those bridges might actually be crossed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. To start out with that, would you like to chime in, Ms. Ingram?
Maybe just kind of a general comment that maybe speaks to your more specific point. We're just awash in information. There's just too much, right? We don't have an information deficit, we have an information glut. And so how do we actually find the information that we need and that's relevant to us and that's going to make a difference and that speaks to us in a way that is actionable at some level, I think is a real challenge. Again, I'm not going to give any pat answers in terms of an actual solution, but it just strikes me that we're in this moment where there's this overabundance of information that makes it really hard to kind of cut through and get to the thing that would actually be useful for us.
And Ms. Cardinal, any points about that, about in particular how we can cut through the noise for Indigenous communities?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have to recognize is that sometimes there has been information that has been created that doesn't fit Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous lives, Indigenous communities. And so how are we ensuring that we are building by having Indigenous people lead, creating the information, the policies, the knowledge protection, that's critical. Because I've worked in community for many years and had seen the gap, whether that be in managing funding with organizations that have come in that said, hey, here you go. This is the information of how you're going to run the programming. This is how you're going to use funding. This is how you're going to do A, B, and C, and D. And then I would take it and I'd be like, well, but this doesn't fit with our people. This isn't the way that we do things. And so how do we, again, our responsibility as Indigenous people is building, again, our own systems of knowledge that fit within our governance structures, that fit within our ways of, for instance, an example within healthcare, right? Like I think about, here we have people in offices that are writing documents and have never stepped foot on the res. I lived in the reserve all my life. I grew up there. I love that place. I'm very privileged to have been raised in my community. But oftentimes there's people who haven't stepped foot there, creating information or policies or documents about us, for us. And so, our work is how do we lead that as Indigenous people to ensure that it's again our Indigenous practice. There's a resurgence of bringing that to the forefront.
Thank you. And Dr. Russell, any points that you'd like to bring up about how to cut through these long documents which may not be accessible to most people?
Right, yeah. Full disclosure, I used to be a bureaucrat, so I used to write some of those reports.
Oh my God.
Honestly.
We're going to talk later.
Right? No, but look, research consistently shows that only 10% of what we learn is through formal learning. In other words, through reading things or to listening to people like us talk at you. Another 20% of what we learn is through other people sharing stories, right? But the full rest of the 70% of what we learn is through doing, okay? And a lot of us have taken this practice and this learning into our classrooms, having students engage in simulation exercises and so on. I find it works for the general public as well. So as you mentioned off the top, our Common Ground team is trying to help Albertans understand the difference between who they are as individuals and who they see themselves to be as community. We lead them through some, what they say are fun activities that end up being pretty poignant lessons, right? So one of them is, and you can do this all yourself now, if you can clear your mind and imagine a white piece of paper, okay? okay? I'm going to hand your mind's eye a black Sharpie marker, and I want you to do the first thing that pops into your head. Are you ready? I want you to draw me an Albertan. Snickering's okay. Draw me an Albertan, right? Albertan might be wearing something or holding something. We go through this, we've done this with over 500 Albertans across the province. And if you're like the vast majority of them, you drew, how many people drew a cowboy?
I was going to say
How many people draw a farmer? Or somebody who works on the rigs, right? Middle-aged, blue-collar, white guys. It's a very exclusive definition of what it means to be Albertan, and we see it impacting our youth, right? Youth that don't fit that stereotype, there's a lot of people that don't, are less likely to stick around Alberta afterwards, right? But by leading people through these activities, we're actually engaging that 70% of their brain that it only learns through doing. And our team is also looking at ways to gamify some of these difficult, crunchy conversations that Annette talks about, right? So we're kind of come up with a series of board games, working with design students from the University of Alberta to design ways of making this fun in different contexts. Because reading reports just doesn't resonate with people. You've got to make it meaningful for them. You've got to make it personal. And the only way you can do that is through experience.
I love the idea of having a board game. I
Yep.
can imagine so many people would get more engaged with that. I believe we have another question over here.
Thank you very much. My name's Gail Powley with Technology Alberta. I have a little bit of information, and to that point, what are we doing about this? So there, I have two examples of what people are doing about this from the Edmonton area and from across Alberta. There are two young ladies from the University of Alberta, students, that started a company called Arito Labs, addressing this gender, social media negative outcry against women. And that company has now grown and is now serving a global market and sports teams around the world that have visible minorities that are often bullied online. So this technology exists, and there is a bigger problem than just one solution can serve. But would love to provide more information on Arito Labs, A-R-E-T-O Labs. And then in addition to that, some of you may know about the Alberta Innovates accelerators that exist. And there's a community safety wellness accelerator based using AI solutions to help community in so many ways. And of that, and in fact, Ms. Ingram, I think you may have been part of that accelerator, if you may be aware of it. So perhaps you can talk to about that experience. But overall, social innovation is the area that's growing the fastest within the tech sector, within my experience. So the good news is people are stepping up to do something about it, but we need a lot of help. And especially when the problem is a problem of the greater population, then more people will do something instead of just a targeted minority, which is a shame, but the good news is the general population recognizes something needs to be done. Thank you.
So we'll just direct that question to Ms. Ingram, just in the interest of time.
Sure, yeah, I think that I'm familiar with Arito Labs and Gail as well, and thank you for making those comments. I definitely think there are opportunities for tech to be part of the solution. I always caution, though, that it's not, you shouldn't make it the only solution. So I think there's, technologies that can actually play a role in this. The other thing I want to call out, and Gail spoke to this a bit, is who is building those technologies? Who are they? What do they stand for? What values are they bringing to the table? And then how is that showing up in the technology itself? So I think there's a role for that, but again, don't make it the only solution.
And I believe there's a question over here. We have about time for one, potentially two more questions. a very big question for the final take. Just if a short answer.
Yeah, I could provide. I'd like to respond. So when I was 18, I came to MacEwan, and I've shared this story before to folks, and I didn't see myself reflected here at the institution. I tried my best to kind of actually blend in spaces. We didn't have a very big, even at that time, an Indigenous center. I'm not aging myself, I'm still young. And so one of the things that I think about at that time was, you know, again, when I reflect back, is that I did that for out of safety as well. How do I keep myself safe? How do I keep myself safe in a space where I don't see many people who look like me? And oftentimes in the classroom, when they were teaching about Indigenous people in Canada, I was always deficit-based. And so you heard about, you know, how we filled up the jail systems. You heard about how all our children, you know, are in the child welfare system. And, you know, I didn't know what my future looked like then. There was no damn way that I thought I would be an AVP here at MacEwan, you know, 2010, just kidding, 20 plus years ago. I never thought that. It was not even something that crossed my mind. And so I think about, you know, there's also, how do you hold hope for yourself and trust that your journey is, you know, there is a plan for you. And whatever that plan is, you know, that, you know, you're gonna make it. And so I think that we talked about hope. How do we have hope? You know, I had hope at that time. I left my community, I felt very disconnected. You know, I was in a large institution, and I pushed myself through. You know, I would fail. I failed some courses, you know, and I kept pushing through, and it took some time. But here I am in a space where, you know, I'm able to bring that experience and that knowledge and engage in ensuring that we have good supports for students, and not just seeing themselves reflected in one little space, but how do we encourage one another and see ourselves reflected across the university through that. And so, you know, we may not always have the answers. Sometimes we want to know. I wish I knew, you know, when I was that young. I wish I knew what, you know, I still don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up, you know. And so I think that trusting your faith, you know, having that connection to community, to our youth, to our families is important. Thank you.
Very much for that. Well, we'd love to continue this conversation as we go through our reception period, but please give a round of applause here for our esteemed panelists. Before we finish, I'd just like to present everyone up here with a gift from us at MacEwan University.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Uh-oh, that's kind of open a bit there. That's okay. Let's have a round of applause again for our panel. And please join us. Let's continue the conversation while we enjoy some autumn treats. Please join us for that. Thank you very much.